Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to this event co-hosted by GlobalChoices, the UNFCCC, and Mission Blue. I will start with introducing our host and moderator for the day, Inge Relph. Inge Relph is the Executive Director and co-founder with Sally Rani of GlobalChoices. She has a corporate background and is known for both policy innovation around global systems change to achieve the environmental and social development goals, her governance and security policy, and multilateral action to protect the global commons. She was senior policy advisor to the Elders, a group that included President Carter, Mary Robinson, Kofi Annan, and Gro Brundtland during the landmark SDG and COP21 negotiations, and has also been an advisor to the Vatican, the Commonwealth, and several governments around the world. Inge sat on the Council of the London Chamber of Commerce. She co-founded the Arab International Women's Forum and chaired Womankind Worldwide, which is the largest UK women's development agency. Understanding the impact of conflict on women, she moved into peace building, establishing in Egypt, together with several Middle Eastern First Ladies, Women in Peace Collaborative in the region. Inge is a board member of the Responsible Finance and Investment Foundation and a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. Justice lies at the heart of her environmental activism, not only because it's the greatest existential threat facing us all, but the poorest and marginalized are inevitably worst affected. Recognized as one of the 100 International Women of Spirit, she believes that change comes from a change in consciousness, that there is no other. I'd like to welcome Inge to the stage now.
Thank you, Divya. You don't recognize yourself from these descriptions, do you? Especially when you're sleep deprived and have sore feet. And for sure, we all share something, and that is we all put our pants on one leg at a time. But we also share here today, which is Oceans Day here at COP, a love of the ocean and an understanding of just how critical it is. And for us at GlobalChoices, the part of the ocean that we are most focusing on is the frozen ocean, because we have a whole system going extinct on our watch. We have already lost 7.9 trillion tons of Arctic ice, and it's melting as we watch. The poles are warming 4 to 6 times faster than anywhere else. So if you want to see what plus 1.5 degrees looks like, look at the poles. It's also, the direct correlate with emissions. It's a phenomenal bellwether for that. The poles and the graph of the emissions going up and the ice going down is exactly a mirror opposite. So for every 1 ton of carbon that we emit, we lose 3 square meters of ice. So, I don't want to do my calculations of what it has cost us all getting here. And it's also, of course, about climate justice. Because, yes, there are 4 million people living in the Arctic, many of them indigenous, and they are losing their way of life. But it is also a phenomenally unique biome. There are over 26,000 unique species in that space. And it's a biome we lose at our peril. It's also, now, for the moment, probably one of the last pristine biomes on Earth. So why on earth would we even think about, doing something like a trans-polar shipping route so that we can ship LNG faster across the poles? Why would we think about deep-sea mining? Yes, there are very rich ridges under the ice. We don't even know what's under the ice. We know more about the moon than what's under the ice. And also things like oil and gas. I think it's a really salutary thing that here, finally, fossil fuel reduction and elimination has been on the agenda big time. So that is really what we are doing at GlobalChoices. And we are being really innovative about the way we're doing it, because there are very few solutions in this space. And we felt it didn't make sense. It's a bit like saying, well, we'll plant trees, but we'll cut down the Amazon. And I was at a very high-tech thing yesterday, and geoengineering and solar radiation, and let's make ice. And I thought, well, how about we just protect the ice we've got? Number one. The Arctic does not have a treaty like Antarctica. So we need, and we're calling for, a 10-year moratorium, a precautionary principle pause to protect the Central Arctic Ocean ice against these harms. We also want to restrict tourism because now, and there's a huge ambition, and we're already starting to see these ships coming into the poles, is sort of see it before it goes kind of tourism. So a bit like the Grand Canyon, we believe we should have restrictions on tourism. So that part of the innovation is to have this legal, the way we do it is a legal team who can develop, and I have been over the summer been developing this moratorium legal text, because we cannot wait for a treaty. I mean, the BBNJ was wonderful to get across the line, but it took 16 years. It's likely that we will have ice-free summers within 10 years. So we have to do something fast. So we're modeling something new on the legal space. Thank you. And we're also modeling new ways of pricing and valuing in a three-dimensional way what it will cost if we lose the Arctic. Not only economic costs, but also the biodiversity costs and the social costs, because they are not put together, and we don't understand the intersectionality and how they amplify. I mean, we just think about migration and what that will mean, and we think of what Syria did to Europe. It's, destroyed multilateralism. It's still creating huge, and this is multiples of that when people get on the move. So we are looking at those and bringing some really innovation into that space. And I would say also, the one we were very early on was an intergenerational and a feminine lens. So we created the Arctic Angels, many of whom are here. And we now have 65 of them in 37 countries. And trust me, if someone from Uganda stands up and says, I care about the Arctic, you listen very differently. And we do care about the Arctic in Uganda, we care about the Arctic in Kenya, we care about the Arctic in Argentina, because we are essentially all ice-dependent species, which is what we brought this to get theme around this. And boy, are you in for a treat. You couldn't have asked for a more stellar bunch of people to speak. But before we do that, I actually am going to call on Ovais to come and speak, if he would, on just one of the things that we were talking about yesterday at the UNFCCC is that how over here you've got negotiations, and here you've got all this busyness and the pavilions and everything else happening and events, but we actually don't bring the two together. And I think it would be quite nice at this stage of COP just to have an overview of what is happening and whether, all this effort and all that melting ice that we are creating and the stocktake, how it looks. So if I could just mention that Ovais was the former, Ovais Samad, sorry to use your formal title, was the former executive secretary of the UNFCCC, deputy secretary. And he has served, prior to that, he spent 27 years at the International Organization of Migration. So Ovais, better than anyone, would understand what migration will mean to scale, and has worked in the Philippines in several management capacities, including at the IOM serving as the chief of staff. So I think it'll be really helpful to us if I could ask you to come up, Ovais, and just give us a little overview of what is happening and whether you are hopeful. And I have to say, hope is going to be the theme of today. Thank you.
Very good morning, everyone, and thank you very much, Inge, for that very generous introduction. And yes, so I was with the UNFCCC until a few months ago. I'm no longer with the UNFCCC, but very closely following the process and here to support the negotiations and, more importantly, actually the climate action that needs to happen. As Inge just mentioned, there are three sides to the UNFCCC COPs. There are the negotiations, what happens in the pavilions and in the green, and then in the green zone, what happened. I was there in the green zone briefly yesterday, and I was awestruck with the action, the ambition, the innovation, the ingenuity of all of us, the humanity that is advancing, that is breaking many, many barriers, which is very, very important. And I think it's going in the right direction. But as you rightly said, the connections between what is happening there and what the negotiators and the politicians do, there is a gap. And that's all, unfortunately, has been there for a number of years, sometimes deliberately, and other times just because those two processes tend to be competing with each other. But what I have felt over the years is that eco-space around the negotiations, in the green zone and the pavilions and these events, do make a difference. They resonate, they echo, they are an echo chamber, if you like, to the negotiators, to the politicians. So therefore, we need to, at this in this space, be as bold, be as outspoken, and be as demanding as we can be to ensure that the negotiators get that message, and the politicians. The ministers will be here this week. Are they already there? And another thing which I have experienced in the COPs is what happens in the 2 weeks of the COP, and especially in the last few days. It's just the tip of the iceberg. And they struggle or, get out their pens and negotiate the commas and the full stops and the wording and the terminology. Unfortunately, that really doesn't cut the cake. What really matters is what happens afterwards in terms of the outcomes and the decisions, the political messaging. And it's not just the headline news that also we know. Right now, the big divide is between phasing out fossil fuels and everything else. There are many variations of it. But that, for someone who's been within the process, is important, but not the key critical aspect of what happens at COP, because there are many other work streams that are happening, that are being negotiated, that are being agreed upon in mitigation, adaptation, means of implementation, transparency, finance, loss and damage, and so on. And I have seen and noticed there is improvement. There is a progress in all of those work streams. They're all going in the right direction. And sometimes the headline news gets fixated on that sort of final outcome, final wording of the overall headline decision of COP. And that's something that we should not get too bogged down with, but focus on everything else that is out there, that is the underlying basis of what means to be making the change that needs to happen. And as you said, I've been with the International Organization for Migration. I've seen myself very closely, especially the most striking one was in Kiribati some years ago, and talking to the president at that time who came to one of the IOM Council meetings. He was in tears, saying that his population, his people are going to have no place to live. And therefore he wanted the organization at that time to help support in the facilitating the movement of those people to other parts of the world, not as climate refugees or migrants, but as citizens of the future countries that they would belong to. So that is what it is, and you've rightly said, every fraction of a degree is making an impact. It is actually resulting in, let's be plain and simple, loss of lives and livelihood everywhere. And more recently, I was associated and still am with the Cryosphere. Pam is here somewhere. And I've come to understand the importance of the cryosphere around, and what happens in cryosphere, what happens in Arctic or Antarctic doesn't just stay there. It has impact on each one of us, no matter where we are. And as we've heard, it's warming 4 times or sometimes even 5 more than other parts of the world. So it is really serious. And we all have a role to play. And I'm so pleased that many of us are here. I see Johan here. It's a great pleasure, privilege to be part of the discussion, to listen to Johan, and especially his planetary boundaries that he has very eloquently and clearly stated that where we are in terms of the tipping points of those planetary boundaries. So, and the work, Sylvia, it's a great honor and a pleasure to see you here and what you have done. And as I said to you, your voice really matters. It has weight, it has significance. So please do share with us what you feel beyond the politics, beyond the strategies, beyond the words needs to happen. So with that, I wish you all a good session. Thank you.
Thank you, Orvez. That's a very positive message, that good stuff is happening. And I must say, good stuff seems to be happening all over the place. And it's this mobilizing. Even 5 years ago, it would be unthinkable to have the real commitments that we're having and the money following. So we are hopeful. Now, it's my great honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Sylvia Earle. She is a role model for so many people. It was crazy. We had her at the Arctic Circle Assembly recently, and you couldn't even go to the bathroom, and she was mobbed, and people wanting selfies, and people saying that she had set them on the path for their careers. And only yesterday, she very kindly took time from a very important meeting to give attention to a young reporter who was here to do youth reporting. And just, we know that those are the lives that get changed, and that's how lives get changed. But she's never too busy to find that sort of time too, and we really respect you for that, Sylvia. Thank you. Affectionately known as her deepness, for spending over, 7,000 hours under, I was about to say years, underwater. Sylvia founded the Sylvia Earle Alliance, the Mission Blue, and is an author, she's an explorer, she's a marine biologist of world renown, and she was explorer in residence at the National Geographic Society. She's also an ocean elder. Among her many honorary doctorates and international awards, she was honored by Time magazine as the first hero of the planet in 1998, by UNED as Champion of the Earth in 2014, and elected Glamour magazine 2014 Woman of the Year, being the first woman scientist at NOAA. So a real pioneer setting the path, and I'm sure you won't mind me saying here at 88, still doing this. And whenever I'm flagging, I think, I can't. Sylvia is doing this at a much heavier pace than any of us, and she's the role model. You can't complain. She has led more than 100 expeditions researching marine ecosystems. And she is also featured in Mission Blue, an Emmy Award-winning Netflix documentary. And at her age, she is continuing to be speaking out, but speaking out with that wonderful elder wisdom. And that's what we need more of in the world. And we're really honored to have her as an advisor at GlobalChoices. So I would love to ask you up, Sylvia, because you're going to be talking what Time magazine tells us is the most important place on Earth. Thank you.
Thank you, Inge, and thanks to all of you for assembling here around the common cause of trying to keep Earth habitable. It's the biggest challenge, the biggest opportunity that we have as 21st century human beings. Imagine if we did not know what is now knowable about the trends that we are for the first time able to measure and project the consequences of what our species has been doing since we arrived as part of the fabric of life, and how much we have changed the nature of nature since our arrival, mostly, at a scaled up pace that, again, for the first time in our history, we are able to measure and calculate the consequences just in the past few decades. I can speak to a time when Earth was a different planet than it is today. David Attenborough, Jane Goodall, and I share a piece of our lives in the Holocene, that sweet spot in time, last 10,000, 11,000 years or so, when things just came together just right for us, and civilization has prospered, and our numbers have grown from, let's go back to 1500, about 500 million people on Earth. Fast forward to 1800, we reached 1 billion. When I came along, when David Attenborough and Jane and I came along, there were 2 billion. Where are we today? 4 times that number, but Earth is the same size. But Earth is a different place than when I was a child. We need to take this change, the magnitude of our impact on the planet, into account. We live by laws, policies, habits, beliefs that are really anchored into a time when Earth was a different place. We need to start from where we're at and rethink our laws, our habits, our beliefs. Look at the evidence and let's reboot where we are so that we can safeguard everything we care about. What do you care about? Life itself would come pretty high on the agenda. If we are to have a habitable planet, we have to look at the evidence. What have we got in the 21st century as a starting place when we say, oh, how much more can we repurpose the land to suit what we think of as our current desires? How much can we take out of the ocean? How much more can we put into the ocean? Given that our starting place is now. It's not 1950. It's not 1,000 years ago when many of our beliefs about how much we are right to take from nature. The reality is, right now, our highest priority must be to safeguard as much as the natural living systems as we can make happen and restore what we can. Everything else follows from that. All of the things that we want to do for our species, first we have to breathe. First we have to have a planet that works in our favor. Nothing else matters if we fail to take care of the ocean, because the ocean is the principal driver of climate, of weather, of planetary temperature, planetary chemistry. The ocean is where the action is. And that itself has always been the way ever since life on Earth began. It's the ocean. It's the blue planet that makes it habitable for life throughout the history of life, but certainly life as we know it in the 21st century. And yet think about what we're doing to the ocean, using it as the ultimate place to dump things that we don't want near where we are. Waste disposal. But it's also where we take things, oil, gas, minerals, wildlife by the ton, millions of tons of wild animals we've been taking out of the ocean, and millions of tons of junk, especially new, non-degradable materials, we call them plastics, that we're putting into the ocean, altering the nature of the chemistry of the ocean. And we talk here now about what we can do to make a difference. Let's just pause. Let's hit the pause button in the Arctic. A 10-year moratorium is a pretty good place to start. A 10-year moratorium on deep sea mining, a 10-year moratorium on a whole lot of things, because while we're making policies based on what we know, we should be making policies based on what we don't know. Maybe in 10 years, we'll have a better understanding of how everything fits together. We have learned so much in the last 10 years, the last 50 years, the last 100 years, and the pace is picking up. I feel pretty good about what we might know in 10 years that would give us a better chance at safeguarding our species if we haven't already pushed ourselves over the edge within the next 10 years. I can't wait to hear what Johan is going to say. about planetary boundaries. But I do think, as I have heard him say recently, that the key to giving us the best chance is probably the ocean. The ocean. There are a lot of red flags about all the directions that we're heading, even if we do behave ourselves and bring ourselves into line. We're still not where we need to be. But the ocean, if we treat the ocean with dignity, respect, and really understand that we have to change our attitude about what we put into the ocean and what we take out of the ocean, we might just make it. Because the ocean is the big X factor. We've only seen maybe 10% of the ocean. That's seen, looked at it. Only mapped about 20% with the same degree of accuracy that we have for the moon, Mars, Jupiter, whatever. That's the bottom of the ocean floor. But what about the ocean between the top and the bottom? That's the big X factor. It's not uniform. It's layered, it's complicated, and we're just beginning to put it on the balance sheet. And we don't have a lot of time, but if we just say we don't know, and therefore the precautionary principle should kick in, and we go beyond what we know in terms of what we should be doing, and put that X factor on the balance sheet. So if you set limits about what we can take out of the ocean based on what we think we know, maybe we ought to think about what we don't know and really reduce that level of expectation by a really big margin, because what we don't know is a really big margin of what is actually there. So I want to share my personal journey a little bit. That's not my personal journey. I think we are not starting at the starting place. Could we go back to the beginning of what I was going to say? This is somewhere along the way. The beginning is an experience I had in 1979 when I was given an opportunity to use this astronaut-looking suit to enable me to go into the depths of the ocean, not that deep, only 400 meters, plus or minus a bit. What I had seen, what I had learned as a scientist, reading the books, looking at the evidence, looking at the measurements that scientists have been making, I knew that even though I was in Hawaii in a warm day, sun, high noon, beaming down, warming the surface waters, as I descended in this little diving suit that made it possible for me to go and walk on the ocean floor, I knew it was going to get colder as I went deeper. Even as a scuba diver, anybody who does it, you know, even in warm tropical waters, if you get down to the deepish ends of where you can go, I mean, only 30 meters, you can sense the difference between what's up here and what's below. The reality is the deep sea everywhere, even in the tropics, let alone in polar areas, is cold. It's not freezing, because if it were freezing, since ice is lighter, the water in its ice form tends to float. I mean, it's lighter than the water itself. One of the remarkable properties of liquid water. One of the remarkable properties of water. And just feeling it, being down there, with you see, inside I was trying my best to keep the condensation, the difference in temperature inside and outside. I had to keep, cleaning the glass so that I could see. But I could see life. How do we do this? Could see life. Maybe someone else has to do the push it. There we go. Creatures that like it cold, like most of life on Earth likes it cold. They need the cold. Where is life on Earth? We are terrestrial, so what we know mostly is about life on the land and in the ocean to about the depth where in recent times millions of people have been able to go as divers, as snorkelers, breath-hold divers. But we don't go deep unless you're in a little submersible or lower instruments to really sense the nature of where most of life on Earth actually lives, in the deep sea, where it is cold all of the time, unless you're around a hydrothermal vent. That could be a little toasty. But creatures like this bamboo coral that has the remarkable characteristic of being able to bioluminesce. And I had a chance to witness this. Later, years later, like in 2018, I had a chance to go back. Remember, it was in 1979 that I first went to this place. I went back to Hawaii in the Pisces sub. You see, it's like a garden out there. It's not devoid of life, as we had thought before we had the opportunity to go into the deep sea and witness the reality of the enormous diversity and abundance of life. Maybe someone has to change these. There we go. First, I did it with my arm in a metal sleeve, touched that bamboo coral and watched it flash and glow. Going back to 2018, I could actually take photographs from inside the submarine. And why is this not working? There we go. Should do it again. It's just this living light that is a characteristic of communication in the deep sea. Again, it's rare on the land, but really common in the deep sea. What happens when you warm the temperature? What happens when you change the chemistry of the ocean? Do the lights go off? Does it interfere with communication? We don't really know. Shouldn't we know before we do further damage, further change to that realm, that dark, cold realm where most of life on Earth actually lives? We've been around in the ocean, in the deep sea, for such a short period of time, given the history of human civilization, given the history of life on Earth. Just this little fraction of time when submersibles are being developed to be able to go down and explore, to be a witness. You think about Jane Goodall spending years getting to know one species pretty well. Chimpanzees, changing everything about our perception of who we are and who they are, those other forms of life that make our existence possible. To have a change in our behavior toward them, a new ethic of looking at other creatures on the land. We have a long way to go before we look at other creatures in the sea with similar compassion, empathy, or understanding about how their lives and ours really come together as one interacting fabric of life. Well, we're coming a long way with whales compared to where we were when I was a child, but that's just one small category of our fellow mammals. The splendor of life itself, the greatest diversity of life, with essentially all of the major divisions of life are out there in the deep sea. Only about half of the great phyla of animals, the major classes of organisms, are on the land. But in the ocean, you don't have to go very far. A coral reef, a seagrass meadow, the deep sea, in a place you can embrace with your arms, even here in the Gulf. Back in 1972, Saudi Aramco did a study about wet sand, intertidal sand, and found on the order of half 1 million individual species in what looked like empty sand. But if you really look at it, they probably had some graduate students do the counting. But the diversity, more than a dozen phyla, big categories of life. You know, polychaete worms, okay. Crustaceans, that's arthropods. And going down the whole mollusks, you know, big wedges of life. In this little space, we think of rainforests as having great diversity, and they do, but mostly at the splintery ends called species. The ocean, you have to think big, the great wedges of life itself. Currently, with some of those categories at risk because of what we're doing. We're so fortunate to live in an age when spacecraft can go high in the sky and witness this biogeochemical miracle we call home, Earth. At the same time, we are fortunate to live in a time when technology has reached a level so that we can go deep in the sea and witness this biogeochemical miracle that is our home. It was actually the first individuals who were able to go to the real North Pole not until 2007, when a Russian expedition with 2 Mirsovs took 6 lucky witnesses to go under the place that we mark on the map as the North Pole. So if you want to say that Perry went to the North Pole first, or whoever we claim were at the top, where is the real North Pole? It's down there under the frozen ocean, the Arctic Ocean. And to be able to have the privilege of understanding this, go back 100 years, nobody could dream of going under the North Pole. Nobody could dream of going, or we did dream, but whoever actually got to the moon, now we know. And we should be fortunate, it should be, thrilled to be who we are, when we are, with the best chance we will ever have to understand what we're doing. Polar bears are being impacted by climate change. Walruses, all the creatures in the Arctic, all the creatures on the surface of the planet, and all those below. But they don't know what to do about the problems. If they knew what the causes were, we're the only ones. We're the cause, but we're the solution. And when you look, whether it's, and either don't move quite so fast, please. I'm not doing it. Think about the large creatures, the big trees, the big animals, but think about the little guys too, shaping the planet's chemistry from billions of years ago right up to the present time. The heavy lifting, generating oxygen, capturing carbon, creating the cycles of life, and vulnerable to changes in chemistry, changes in temperature, and you don't have to change the temperature very much to change the nature of who can live where, in what numbers, in the ocean or on the land. And we have seen a decline in phytoplankton in the ocean during my lifetime. Maybe there are trends that go back that we can't measure because we can't effectively go back in time to measure all of what we now wish we could see, so we could understand where we fit in to those long pulses of changes. But what we do know and can measure is what's on our watch, when we can see the decline of kelp forests, also doing some of the heavy lifting, generating oxygen, capturing carbon, maintaining planetary chemistry, providing home for great diversity. Wait, stop. We can go to the moon, but can we figure out how to get images changed in a presentation? The Sargasso Sea, where, again, it's a floating golden rainforest that we think of sometimes as a problem when it comes ashore, but it's doing the heavy lifting, generating oxygen, capturing carbon, providing homes for other creatures. Now try. Seagrass meadows, they're one of the greatest forms of generating oxygen, capturing carbon, providing food and sustenance here in the Gulf and around the world. But about half of them are gone, along with coral reefs, the kelp forests, and many other systems that are necessary to hold the planet within those boundaries that I hope we'll soon hear about from Johan. Phytoplankton leads to zooplankton. Zooplankton leads to the small fish that lead to the big fish that lead to this extravagant diversity of life. Small fish get their start in the phytoplankton. When you dive into the ocean, you're diving into the nursery of life. The larval stages have just about everybody. Not everybody, but a major cross-section of life. At the other end of the world, we're talking about the Arctic, but in the Antarctic and in the Arctic, krill are really critical as grazers on the phytoplankton. Whales and other creatures need food, but they can't get to the real source, the phytoplankton. They can get to the middlemen. They can get to those who have, you see, they've been grazing on green. They have the green innards. By taking the krill out of the system, you're really pulling a cornerstone out of this web of life. And they have been safe for gazillions of years, who knows exactly how long, but along come humans with a capacity to kill seals, okay, kill penguins, yep, check, kill whales, check. Now we're going there to kill krill. We stopped generally killing the seals, the penguins, and the whales, but we're still looking at what we call biomass, just there's something that can be used as a product. All right, so Inge, you asked, why? Why would we even think of doing such a thing? Why? Why are we in the 21st century knowing here is the planetary trend? We're in trouble. The carbon cycle, we ought to have that as a every day. What's happening to the carbon cycle? Here it is, carbon cycle in action. Sunlight, phytoplankton, krill. And with huge vessels currently, while we're sitting here, yeah, right, this is summer in Antarctica. So those ships are down there, killing the krill by the ton, taking deep sea fish out of Antarctica. Can you say this is because indigenous people really need to do this? Is this a long-term habit? Is this some kind of habit that we're trying to protect? No, this is something new. We have new access, new markets, and we're stuck with this old way of thinking that nature is there for us to take and use it and think of it as free goods. So it's time, isn't it, to think differently about what we are taking from the ocean, what we're putting into the ocean. This is our last best chance to understand the real danger we are in. I mean, to be a squid in Monterey right about now, actually a little bit later in the year, is a hazardous thing because the squid, these are not the big fleets, these are just the little fleets. But around the world, just in the last few decades, squid, many species, are in the crosshairs of large-scale extraction, upending the capacity of these food chains, the chemistry of the ocean, to be maintained as it has been doing, not just for millennia, but for millions of years. I mean, there aren't that many species of cephalopods, fewer than 500 of them. When you think of insects, there may be 500,000 kinds of insects, but among cephalopods, just a few hundred. We could eliminate whole categories of the genetic information that this planet holds if we keep doing what we're doing, because right now it seems like a good idea. this moment in time, when we are poised with a technology that did not and could not exist when I was a child, now exists to turn our attention to the deep sea, not just the surface waters where we can deploy these enormous nets to take whatever it is we wish, but to go all the way down, miles beneath the ocean, with equipment that is designed to act like bulldozers on the sea floor, to take manganese nodules or crusts from seamounts or whatever. They form around something organic, these manganese nodules, around a whale, a ear bone of a whale or a shark's tooth. It's a living process, extracting the elements of the universe, if you will, that are in seawater to create these metal-rich, mineral-rich formations. And yes, we could probably turn them into something useful like batteries or, I don't know, what do you want to use the minerals of the earth for? And they're using now an excuse to upend these amazing formations that we only discovered recently, and to mine the ocean with a belief that we need to use some of those materials, nickel and cobalt, to power a transition to a so-called green economy. But at what cost? At what cost? And do we really need them? The answer we're finding is, well, no, not really, because they're batteries that are now being produced that don't require nickel and cobalt. It's really an illusion. We can stop, there we go. Illusion that we need to continue to exploit nature on a level that by any measure, whether we're talking about deep sea minerals, squid, tuna, old growth forests, it's not sustainable. We must come to the point where we say, enough already. We must respect the natural systems, wherever they are, that are still in good condition. And we must restore what we can while there's still time. Those planetary boundaries are real. What we haven't really taken into account is the magnitude of what we don't know. Precautionary principle says, look at the Arctic. Let's hit the pause button. A 10-year moratorium should not be too much to ask. Let's look at Antarctica. These drivers of cold water, of maintaining a habitable planet by our standards. Now, I have to say, some creatures like it really hot, but not the creatures of the deep sea. We don't like it too hot either. I mean, when are we going to put it all together? Our desires, our hopes, our respect for others? To put that on the balance sheet when we make our decisions going forward? I tell kids, maybe you've felt this with the children in your life, the sense of real concern about the future. Maybe you feel it as a grown-up. But I say, imagine if we didn't know. Just think of this moment as the best time to ever be a human being, because we've got the best chance to secure the future of our species within this dynamic living system. We're one of millions of other species, but we have the power to hold the planet steady if we choose to do so, or to continue exploiting nature and taking all of nature, including ourselves, to a very bad place. I must say, Antarctica, the continent that is surrounded by an ocean that belongs to no one or everyone, the high seas, when you think about it, we should be thinking about it. As Inge said, what are we thinking? Why would we even think to exploit the waters around Antarctica? Even if we do it sort of with a conscientious attempt to be fair. But it's not working. It isn't working to go and say that it's okay to take krill by the ton, the deep sea fish by the ton, when these are the elements that shape planetary chemistry. Think, where is the carbon cycle? And what can we do on our watch in the 21st century with the high seas about half the world, the deep seas, the polar regions? We must not be timid, or we will pay the price. And if we get it right, 10 years from now, or why wait then? Why not come in 2030, only 7 years from now, and look back at this time and say, what did we do, or what did we fail to do? I personally am an optimist, have reasons for hope. I see people around the world, I'm looking at you, looking with a different way of thinking about what we should be doing, what we have been doing, what we can be doing to protect nature, protect the ocean, protect the Arctic, protect the Antarctic, protect life, as if our lives depend on it, because now we know they do. Thank you.
For this too. There we go. Now our mic is on. Thank you so much, Sylvia. I think if we haven't got a sense of awe, then there is something very wrong with us. And it is this recovery of awe that actually will allow us to protect this planet. Now, we're very grateful to have Johan here, and I know he has a plane to catch. And we invited Johan to talk about planetary boundaries, but also about the 10 must-haves. And so, Johan, if you would, the floor is yours. I don't know if you want to speak from there or from here, wherever you're most comfortable. And I'm sure you will forgive him if he rushes off afterwards. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think I'd rather stand. Well, to be honest, there's not very much to add after Sylvia's fantastic, convincing story. And I just want to start by giving an even deeper reconnection for our need to be really humble with regards to planet Earth. Because we know that the biogeochemical system that we all depend on is a complex, self-regulating, living entity. We know that over the last 3 million years, the Quaternary, the corridor of life has been very narrow. We've never been beyond 2 degrees Celsius of global mean surface temperature rise. That is the warmest temperature on Earth over 3 million years. And the coldest point is -6. Can you imagine? The planet self-regulates itself through the ocean, the biosphere, the cryosphere, to remain within a very narrow range. Then in the last 1 million years, the planet starts cycling within the so-called Milankovitch cycles of 100,000 years of ice ages and short periods of interglacials, 15 to 30,000 years. Now, we understand today that the reason why the planet leaves an ice age and then stabilizes an interglacial is thanks to the oceans. It's not the distance to the sun that does it alone. Actually, the difference from an ice age to a stable interglacial is roughly 6 degrees Celsius. As a little rule of thumb, you can think of 2 of those is the sun. That's external forcing. The other 4 is nature. It's the oceans, it's the biosphere, it's the ice sheets. What's happening today? We play the role of the sun. We think as ourselves as being some kind of planetary scale engineers. So we're causing this artificial energy imbalance of a few degrees Celsius because of our fossil fuel burning. And is it any surprise that planet hits back? So far, planet has been our best friend in trying to dampen. And this is something we're also learning very, very eloquently, that the ocean is the #1 buffering system. It's our insurance, it's our resilience, and it's our life support system. So 93% of the heat caused by our fossil fuel burning is in the oceans. 25% of the carbon dioxide emitted is in the ocean. Is this a positive from the ocean side? Of course not. It's a stress response from the ocean, providing us with this massive subsidy to our unsustainable lifestyles. It leads to ocean acidification. It leads to upwelling of heat. 2023 is a year of shocks. Science is in complete shock over the deviation, the complete off-the-charts observations of what's happening in the ocean. Ocean surface temperatures, upwelling of heat. It's a super El Nino. This is making us really, really nervous, because for 250 years of abuse, the ocean has just been hiding all our negative impacts under the carpet. Now it seems to be losing that capacity and hitting back. It's a living entity. And just as Sylvia pointed out, the last 12,000 years is extraordinary. I even call this, as you may have seen on that slide, the Garden of Eden. This is a 14 degrees Celsius planet, plus minus 0.5. Why is it 0.5? The planet self-regulates. It has this extraordinary capacity to stay in its basin of attraction, the Holocene. To put it simple, it's biogeochemistry, for sure, it's no magic, but the planet does not want to leave the Holocene. That's the response it's making to our fossil fuel burning and energy imbalance. So all this uncertainty we have, when you look at all the planetary boundaries, leads in my mind to just one conclusion. We're very certain that we're taking unacceptable risk and that we need to back off. I think that the moratorium idea of the Arctic is absolutely necessary. The Arctic is warming 3 times faster than the planet as a whole. It's the ground zero of what's happening on planet Earth today. And we are still allowing deep sea mining and oil exploration as if this was a stable system. It's no longer stable. So it's like time to really take the science, but also our deep connection and respect for the life support systems on Earth seriously. And there's no person on planet Earth that articulates that so strongly as our hero #1, Sylvia Earle. It's just so fantastic to be able to have this opportunity. You should have been at the plenary and speaking to everyone here to help them take the final decisions towards a phase out of fossil fuels and the stewardship of the entire planet for our future on Earth. Thank you so much. And sorry that I need to sneak off, unfortunately. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you so much, Johan, for squeezing that in. Hugely appreciative, and safe journey home. Without question, Johan has really created new ways of thinking about the Earth as whole systems, which is really what we have to do. And so may I hand over to Pam Pearson. Let me give you a slightly more formal introduction to Pam. And she's the founder of the International Cryosphere Climate Initiative and the Ambition on Melting Ice. And Pam has actually driven a lot of the work around why the cryosphere is so important. It really was actually such a neglected system. And she is a diplomat, and she has really driven the agenda on this. We were in Paris together, and has been a role model for us as GlobalChoices on the work that she has done. She worked on the Kyoto Protocol, so she, like Sylvia, has seen a lot of changes. But I'm going to, in interest of time, hand straight over to you, Pam, to give us a little sense of the cryosphere and its importance. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And this is going to be a very brief, I'm going to actually do in 5 minutes what I normally do in 10. This is one part of the Earth system, but it really is a driver. And our main message is that there's really no negotiating with the melting point of ice. These are some of the boundaries in the ice system that you can see, and they click in well before 2 degrees. That is one of the main messages scientists are bringing. This slide really helps to emphasize what Johan was talking about. These are ice ages versus non-ice ages, and CO2 in the atmosphere, which is a real driver, never went, it was always between 180 and 280. You can see the difference between glacials and interglacials, and this is where we are now. We are way off the charts, and that's why the ice is responding. It has no choice, and it's going to continue responding to CO2 in the atmosphere, mostly from fossil fuels. The Arctic is warming twice as quickly, but Antarctica and the HKH region is warming twice as fast. And so, again, things are accelerating in these parts of the world. This is why sea ice is so important, and it is going fast. It has been going fast, and this is a study just from earlier this year, and as you can see, the only place where you see sea ice in the summer preserved is the very lowest emission scenario where temperatures never go above 1.6 degrees. Even 1.8 degrees, so within the Paris limit, which is the second graph to the left, you see that the ice is below that line of essentially ice-free Arctic. That is why any activity in this part of the world is really important and why a moratorium is key to preserve what ice we have. But we can't forget Antarctica. As Sylvia was saying, this is this past summer. There should be ice all over this view, and it was gone. We had a winter and a summer minimum. Glaciers and snow, I'm going to skip straight ahead to this animation because it gives you a sense of how quickly the ice is disappearing. This is Great Aletsch Glacier in the Alps. The two important messages from here, if you look at this animation through about 2060, there's no difference because there's so much heat built up in the system between low and very high emissions. But if you let it run through to 2100, as it's doing now, you see a huge difference. That is why sticking to 1.5 is so important for the world's glaciers. Polar oceans, which you've heard about, one of the things that is not paid attention to is polar ocean acidification. The polar oceans have absorbed 60% of the CO2 absorbed by all of the world's oceans because they're colder, and that comes at a price. You see shell damage here. These actually were gathered in 2004. So this is when we were still below 400 ppm. Imagine what we're seeing now, which is the spread of these levels, and even in the lower 1.5 degree Earth, portions of the Arctic Ocean cannot support shelled life. That is a very important thing because no matter what we do, this level of acidification, even in the Arctic at 1.5, will last 30,000 years, but the lower, the upper globe, a high emission scenario, 70,000 years. This is essentially irreversible. Permafrost, again in the Arctic, affected by the amount of sea ice, and it decreases our carbon budget. Ice sheets, I'm going to stick on for a bit. This is Greenland and Antarctica, but that dotted line in AR6 was put there based on only 2 studies, but very good studies, and so they felt it was important to include it. Since then, there has been study after study that is pointing to the dotted line. This is one that came out earlier this year. And as you can see in the upper right, the rate of warming is going down. The rate of ice loss from the ice sheets is continuing to go up, except for the very lowest emission scenario, again, where we peak at 1.6. That's what we're looking at in the future. And this is what it means for human beings. This is Vanuatu, Vila Vanuatu, the capital, at just 1 meter. You see some sea level rise there. That's now committed. But it will be by 2070 with high emissions if those new scenarios are correct. Here's 3 meters, 6 meters, 10 meters could be by 2300. There was a group of scientists that actually did an action here in COP because the 10-meter line runs straight through the COP28 venue, and they wanted to show where that was. But some other countries, especially small island developing states, are really, really vulnerable. This is 1 meter in Bahamas, This is 3. The country is essentially gone. That could happen early next century if we continue on a high emissions pathway. Here is Dhaka, Bangladesh, and it essentially becomes an island just at 3 meters, and we could reach that early next century. So sea ice is important. I want to bring it back to that because it just feeds back into many of these systems. And where I'm actually going to have to run off of this is the Ambition on Melting Ice high-level group. There's an increasing number of countries that recognizes the connection between the world's ice and its oceans and their own futures. So AMI consists not only of countries like the co-chairs Iceland and Chile, but it also has as founding members Vanuatu, Samoa, Senegal, Liberia. Pakistan will be joining today. There are other countries in line to begin to raise this in the negotiations and especially in the global stocktake. So bottom line, we can do this. We are able to do it. It is our choice as to whether we're going to be on the graph on the left or the graph on the far right or somewhere in between with no Arctic sea ice. And again, IPCC, the special report on 1.5 degrees. This is geophysically possible, environmentally, technologically, economically. The rest is up to us. This really is a choice. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pam. Sobering stats, but also that it is possible. And again, the same refrain, we have a choice, and that's why we are actually called Global Choices. Now, we haven't got that much choice in time because we are very honored to have the Secretary General with us. So before that, if I might ask Tiago to do a short intervention, and then the Secretary General will speak. And we might, if we've got time, have the panel back just to answer some questions. So Tiago Cunha has been the Chief Executive Officer of Oceano Azul Foundation since it was established in 2017. I'm going to skip the intro in the interest of what you're saying, but just to say, if anyone has translated the problem into action, it's Tiago and his team. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be as brief as I can, but much shorter than I planned, but that's okay because I think we benefited a lot from everything we have listened so far. Actually, it's always very difficult to speak after Sylvia, and that's the job I have. I did my homework, so to thank you, Inge. And so you asked me to speak a bit about what we do very fast, and then what's the importance of non-state actors very fast, and the importance of the moratorium. And to start with what Oceano Azul Foundation has been doing, let's say that the most important task that we have, what we call the two-wheel drives of the foundation, have been manufacturing marine protected areas because we need to save what's left. Indeed, we cannot wait for the decision-making that takes time. And at the same time, we've been acting very strongly on ocean advocacy, not so much only between civil society or among civil society as we are here, but very much before national governments and intergovernmental organizations. That's where I think we've been focusing most of our work. In marine protected areas, we are very happy because being still a new kid on the block, we are 6 years old, we have managed to approve 2 marine protected areas. And the last one, which is in the south of Portugal, in the Algarve, in a very busy coastal area, which made it a bit more difficult, is going to be announced by the Ministry for the Environment of Portugal this afternoon at the Portuguese Pavilion. So we are very proud of that. We are also, of course, very much focused on a third. We adopted one before in this lost archipelago south of Madeira, the Selvagens Islands, actually with the Pristine Seas program of National Geographic. And now we are finishing with our colleagues from the Waite Foundation, another very large marine protected area that is going to be by far the biggest in the North Atlantic with 300,000 square kilometers in the Azores. And so you will listen to news about this marine protected area very soon. Ocean international advocacy. Well, there, you know, there is a lot of things to do. We know how the ocean have been away from the radar of most of the multilateral decision making during this century. We had SDG 14, but it was the last one to be agreed and is still the least funded one. We have now this incredible news with Nairobi and plastics and with New York and BBNJ, so 30 by 30 also in Kunming, Montreal. So we are actually on a hopeful note, and I know that you wanted us to speak on hopeful notes. Well, where is the focus now? We have two very, very concrete focus at this moment. Seabed mining, critically. After everything Sylvia said, this cannot happen under our watch. If that happens under our watch, we will not have any credibility to continue to come to these podiums and continue doing these speeches. So I'm very proud that Oceano Azul with Sylvia in the last UN Ocean Conference, when President Macron visited Oceano Azul Foundation, we together managed to convince him to change his position, the position of his country, France, in seabed mining. And since then, we've been working also very hard with Germany and other countries building this coalition that is now on 24 countries, I think, against seabed mining. Second issue is the next UN Ocean Conference. In Nice, in 25, we all need to focus on this because this may be the turning point for ocean action. We are complaining about climate action, and of course we rightly do so because we are not, Paris is way out of where we should be. But if climate action is here, ocean action is still here. So ocean action has a lot to catch with climate action. And in order to do that, Nice is going to be fundamental. So what have we been doing? We work very close with the French government and with the Costa Rican government. We are planning how to raise the ambition of the political dimension of that conference. Not only the things that are going to happen, but what are the decisions that are very important that heads of state and government need to make there. And I will tell you one, which is because of where we are. We are at the climate COP. I say that the ocean is always a small player at climate COPs. We are here. I know that we'll probably have better news than we had last year, according to the negotiations of the text and the global stocktake, but we are still not playing in our home ground. Well, in Nice, we're going to be playing on our home ground. It's the UN Ocean Conference. So we need also to bring climate there. We cannot only speak about ocean in climate conferences, but we need to speak of climate in ocean conferences. And we need the heads of state and government to send a clear message to COP in Brazil, that is at the end of that year, which must be the COP of nature, that nature must be central stage. Finally, just to speak about the moratorium. Well, I was stricken by, and I skip everything about non-state actors so that we move on, but we have to be careful with the non-state actors because we underline their importance, but we also have to be careful that state actors do not put all the burden in non-state actors. So we've seen it with UNOC in 17, how these all voluntary commitments have been mostly delivered by NGOs and so on. So Nice must be the opposite. It has to go back to the states again. And this is very much our position in relation to the next UN Ocean Conference. Enough about non-state actors and state actors. Finally, on the moratorium. I was struck by this sentence that if we lose the Arctic, we will lose the world. My question is, and if we lose Antarctica too, what else will we lose? I have to say that we couldn't be more in agreement with the great job that the GlobalChoices is doing. Please count on us as a partner for your work. We would even be more demanding. We cannot imagine that we need to have a moratorium on new shipping lanes. We have to stop the few shipping that is occurring in the Arctic if we want to have no activity and the full precautionary approach to be applied. So count on us. Thank you very much for our leadership.
Well, thank you, Tiago, really, for your leadership and also for the encouragement, because we all need encouragement. Now, we are very, very lucky to have with us the Secretary-General of the Commonwealth. Patricia Scotland was appointed in, was it 2016? Yes, 2016, as head of the Commonwealth. And one underestimates the power of the Commonwealth. You know, we talk about 53 governments and 2.4 billion people. I mean, it's huge. So the influence of this and having leadership that can take both a moral and a practical approach is really, really important. If I may just say, a Dominican by birth, she moved to the UK at an early age, and she's a lawyer by profession, and she became the first black and youngest woman ever to be appointed the Queen's Counsel. And she is the only woman since the post was created in 1315 to be the Attorney General of England and Wales. And she was appointed to the House of Lords as Baroness Scotland in 1997. She has numerous other positions. But what I will say more than anything, and I've been great fortune to have listened to a number of her speeches recently, is how powerfully she can bridge both the moral values and the practical, and also deliver practical solutions, because so many of the states in the Commonwealth are the very ones who are going to be underwater. Now, I'm just going to give you a quick apology for Relph Regenvanu, the minister from Vanuatu, who is going to speak. Oh, he's here. Sorry, he's arrived. Sorry, I didn't see that from where I was. So if we may have the minister after we've had the Baroness, because I know, Baroness Scotland, you're going to have to go to your next appointment. And then if we can, and the UNFCCC has been very kind, said we've got the space, use it. So we will then put our panel back and you'll be able to have a bit more dialogue, because I know you're dying to do that. Thank you. Baroness Scotland.
Well, firstly, can I say a very warm thank you, and it is a real pleasure to be with you all. This must be one of the most knowledgeable, engaged audience ever assembled to deliberate over ocean protection. And I consider it to be a huge pleasure and privilege to be in the same room as one of our icons, Dr. Sylvia Earle. She is brilliant, and the fact that she is a woman gives me immeasurable delight. But the discussion that we're having now, and the one that we've just heard, represents the breadth and the depth of knowledge, experience, expertise, and commitment which exists in this room. It also reflects the sentiments of so many around the room. And can I just say how pleased and proud I am to be on the same platform with Relph, who is a real champion of small states and has been by my side right the way through this journey, and is for many of us an inspiration in terms of resilience. Because what we've heard today is that the melting glaciers, the ice sheets, the sea ice are not distant impacts of climate and climate change. They are here now, and they are impacting all of us. And we've heard that in warming the planet, the melting ice caps, and the filling the atmosphere with dangerous emissions, climate change is turning off the air, conditioning, insulating the walls, turning up the thermostat to its highest level ever. And the warming and the melt, which is rising and raising our sea levels, is already submerging our most vulnerable islands and inundating our coastal states, bringing flooding, erosion, salination of soils, and creating untold danger, trauma, and real hardship. So we have come to the point of no return, where the ocean, which has silently been absorbing up to 25% of annual carbon emissions, acting as a buffer against the full brunt of climate change in transforming and de-establishing, endangering the lives and livelihoods of countries and communities which really rely on it, and threatening the very machinery of our planet. So we can have no room for doubt. There can be no healthy planet without a healthy ocean. And the ocean gives us, as Sylvia was saying, the air we breathe. Every other breath comes from our ocean. It provides us with the tools to survive: food, income, culture, spiritual nourishment, the critical pillar of climate stability, and the most precious, life-giving, yet undervalued, under-researched, underfunded, and recklessly exploited natural wonder of our planet. And its current stress levels are unprecedented and impossible to sustain. I think we couldn't have had that more powerfully described in all the presentations we have had today. And everybody here knows we cannot carry on like this. In the Commonwealth, we know it too. We live it, we see it, we feel it. Our Commonwealth has grown a little. We are now 2.5 billion people in 56 nations, spread across 5 continents and all the great ocean basins of our world. It is an ocean Commonwealth. 49 of our members states are border with the ocean. The Commonwealth countries are the stewards of more than 1/3 of the global ocean under national jurisdiction. Nearly half of all coral reefs and 1/3 of all mangroves are in our Commonwealth. And 2/3 of the world's small island developing states are in the Commonwealth. We call them big blue ocean states. On average, 96% of their territory is ocean, and only 4% is land, which is why in the Commonwealth, we don't call them small island developing states. We call them, as I've just described them, big blue ocean developing states. And they face an exceptional convergence of hardship. This is not simply about climate change. And it couldn't have been more powerfully said today. Climate change is only part of what we're talking about. It's about the way in which climate change amplifies other crises, especially global economic instability, to place untold pressure on their economies and their societies. And the constant threat of the exogenous shocks is compounded by their geographical remoteness, their limited economic diversification, the infrastructure challenges, and the high reliance on external sources of finance. Meaning that shocks inflict seismic human and economic pain, which amplifies the existing vulnerabilities and compromises their resilience. Indeed, just a few weeks ago, as the Honourable Minister, I'm sure, will tell you, parts of Vanuatu were devastated by a Category 5 cyclone, Lola, which hit 7 months after the twin cyclones of Judy and Kevin, which wiped out 50% of the country's GDP, with recovery costs and recovery efforts priced at 80% of GDP. And for too many of our vulnerable nations, a tragic paradox has emerged, where the ocean is the greatest gift and the greatest threat. A source of social, economic, political, and spiritual strength, and an existential danger. And we all know that they have contributed the least to climate change, but are the most exposed to its impacts. And it is this already raging storm that the waters from our rapidly melting ice caps are flowing. And I want you to know that with all the spirit of our charter and the mandates of our heads of government, the Commonwealth is responding. Our flagship Blue Charter brings our member countries together into active cooperation to solve ocean-related challenges and meet commitments for sustainable ocean action, covering everything from coral reef restoration and protection and ocean acidification to resilient coastal communities and ocean observation. And we've developed a project incubator for the Blue Charter, which uniquely assists governments in developing ocean projects. And I have been proud at this COP to announce 8 new government-backed projects in Barbados, Fiji, Kenya, Kiribati, Nigeria, Seychelles, and Sri Lanka. And through our Climate Finance Access Hub, we have so far mobilized $322 million in vital finance for our most vulnerable members, which we have more in the pipeline. We've got about $500 million in the pipeline, and this has come from a tiny amount of money. We had only $7.8 million. And by the time we finished, I'm hoping we would have delivered 100 million into our families' hands. So the hallmark of the Commonwealth is our unique combination of shared interest, practical advantages, common values, and the willingness to tackle the problems of the world together and head on. And because of the scale of our member states' jurisdiction over the ocean, action in the Commonwealth has global significance. But in turn, the Commonwealth and the world beyond relies on the central Arctic Ocean ice. And that ice shield being intact, being maintained, because maintaining it is essential to our members' survival. So every choice we make, every dollar, every ounce of energy we invest in this right now, this fight, matters. The care we show for our ocean reflects the care we are prepared to show for humanity. And today's event has underlined the fact that we need to show more care and more love to our precious resource. The argument that we need to understand the impacts of exploitation at the Arctic Ocean and its resources before we license it is clear, compelling, and we believe it must be heard, because every one of us, every species, every person, every community, every nation depends on it. And I hope that the power of these arguments and the people we love will mean that we will save our ocean, we will save our world, because, as Sylvia has said, it's the only home we have. And it's humanity's home. And I want to thank each and every one of you for your acuity, your passion, your determination, your belief, because that represents hope. And my member states are not just hoping, they're fighting. So thank you for being willing to fight with us.
Right, folks, I know we'll be very quick. Yeah. So we normally, photographs would mean the end of things, but we are very grateful to have with us Relph when he's finished. Could we ask you, Relph, if you would be very kind to make your statement too, because we would be very interested to hear from your perspective. He is the Minister of Climate Change and Adaptation of Vanuatu, and we asked particularly for him to join us because not only is Vanuatu, as you've just heard, so vulnerable, but also he has really driven a very, very important legal precedent that he is asking for an opinion on liability of climate change on these small island states, and the dynamic of that will change everything. So we're very, very grateful. I'm sorry we've had all these movements, but that's the nature of the beast at COP, with people having so many commitments. And I think, thank you for staying. And those of you who have stayed, well, you know, we've saved the best to last. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you to you all. I'm not going to actually speak long at all, but I wanted to respect the people on the panel and the work that's being done. I apologize that I wasn't here, but we were in these ministerial roundtables which were started today. And we are really at a crucial point because there is a lot of support for this, what needs to happen, which is what our countries are pushing. And thank you to the Baroness for talking all about what the interests of small island states are. We need to see the stop of fossil fuel expansion right now. We need to see subsidies at fossil fuel stopped right now. We need to see deep sea mining stopped right now. We need to see fossil fuel phase out beginning and having a very clear deadline and time frame. And we need to see emissions peak before 2025. And that's what in the room is being pushed from our side. And I'm pleased to see the level of support from other countries, but there is resistance, particularly from our hosts in this region and some of the larger economies. But Vanuatu, as we heard, had 3 Category 4, 5 cyclones this year, and all the effects of it. We are experiencing slow onset sea level rise, but it's not so slow. It's much faster than has been predicted, especially loss and damage is now occurring much faster than expected. And so we are here to see the highest ambition, which needs to happen to save all areas of the world and the ocean. And just in these critical days we are in now, if you have any way to influence your state or any government to fall on the right side of history at this COP, please, we all need to put the pressure on now for an outcome in the next few days. And with regard to the ICJ advisory opinion, I'll just mention it briefly since it was mentioned. There are now alliance of states making submissions to the ICJ for an advisory opinion on what are the obligations of states who've signed up to all of these agreements to protect the environment, to protect human rights, and yet they are blatantly breaching them. And what are the consequences for those states that have signed up to these agreements? So this will be an advisory opinion handed down by the International Court of Justice, probably 2025 at the earliest, at the beginning of 2025. But hopefully that will assist our negotiations here at UNFCCC to really lay out the guardrails and clarify the legal obligations of states and take some of the arguments off the table that you can't continue to argue in the interests that go against the Paris Agreement, that go against all these agreements you've signed, the Convention on Human Rights, Convention on the Law of the Sea, all of these conventions we've signed up to and many countries seem to so blatantly ignore once they've signed it. So thank you again.
Would you care to take a seat here? Thank you. Tiago, would you join? And Sylvia, I know you're going to be leaving in 5 minutes, but if we might have you here on the panel just for 5 minutes, because I know there are many people who are dying to ask questions. So, and please, come join us too. Always, if you would. Thank you. So, this is your big moment. You have 5 minutes before Dr. Earle has to leave, but gentleman at the back.
Yes, hello. Roger Harrabin, freelance journalist, former BBC for 35 years. We're at the COP where debate is constrained by the 1.5 Celsius rise as instanced by IPCC. Many leading scientists that I know are very scared because the world is changing much faster than they had predicted. But those conversations can't happen here because the IPCC is the authority, even though its findings are out of date. I'm just wondering if people could offer some thoughts on the relevance of, continuing relevance of IPCC's 1.5, given what we're seeing on the natural world.
Thanks, Roger. Sylvia.
So the actual question is?
Is 1.5 relevant to what's happening in the natural world?
Oh, my goodness. There are no straightforward answers, but I tell you, the thing that perplexes me the most when we look at these temperature targets, follow the carbon, what we're putting into the atmosphere, what are the natural carbon capturing mechanisms, and why are we continuing to undermine the very systems that got us to a favorable place? Why can't we just see what should be obvious? Why are we continuing to clear-cut forests? Why are we continuing to take large, by the ton, hundreds of tons, millions of tons of carbon-based units that we call fish, krill, shrimp, out of the ocean, especially when you think of the high seas? This is not traditional fishing. This is not food security. And it's the one thing that we could change by what we choose to eat. We've developed a market that is really taking us, along with what we're doing on the land, converting wild lands into other purposes. We need to restore those wild lands and the wild sea if we're going to have a hope of maintaining the temperature. We can come up with all these great ideas about carbon capture machines and this, and we should be creative and think of what we can do to capture carbon dioxide, methane, and stop the emissions. But if we fail to take care of the natural carbon capturing mechanisms that make Earth habitable, that make our existence possible, then we're really not getting the point. It's something that we can choose to do or choose not to do. And this is the moment. I think it's, if we can just wake up to the reality, protecting nature, stop the killing, start the caring, make it fashionable to care. I mean, come on. This is the last best chance we will have.
Maybe I could add on to that, a supplementary.
Sorry, I'm just 1 minute. I'm just going to, I know Dr. Earle has to leave because she's got to get to Belgium. So thank you all very much, and then we'll continue if we may. Thank you.
Just to further answer the question, the AOSIS group, Association of Small Island States, it's our negotiating position that we are not abandoning 1.5. We have to maintain 1.5, and that's why we all have these badges. That is our negotiating position in the big rooms.
And just to add to that, the relevance of 1.5 in IPCC, I think it's central and critical and integral in the entire UNFCCC process. If you've noticed, on the first day of the COP, IPCC chair addressed the plenary, and so it remains, but the politics of the negotiations are what they are, but IPCC in science is the guiding force and the North Star.
I'm going to leave you in very good hands, and thank you.
So if we might just continue on a few more points, with if there are any more questions to the panel. I know that you, but otherwise, Roger, did you have another question?
I wanted probably to add a comment as well to your question, if I may, which is, so it was very interesting what you said about any fraction matters. This should be a new slogan, I have to say. We should launch this slogan. Any fraction of any degree matters. It's not only what, it's the difference as well between the UNFCCC measurement and the Paris Agreement measurement, because we spoke about flows, but we also have to speak about stocking. And that's what was important in '92. And if we know what is already there, we will need to know how to remove what's there as well. If you want to keep to 1.5, we need not only to stop fossil fuel now, but we will have to take out a lot from what's there. And so the question is how to do it. How will we do it without destroying the remaining nature of the planet? And so you know, the challenges are increasing very fast. But not only the challenges are increasing, the impacts of the natural disasters are increasing. Who would say that we had a rain of ashes from Canada's fires in Europe this year? Do you want anything of a bigger magnitude? Who would say that in the Mediterranean Sea, not the Red Sea, not the Persian Gulf, we had an average temperature this summer of 28.4 degrees. So scientists must be really puzzled.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it is absolutely critical for the Arctic. It makes a huge difference. And of course, the cascade effect, as we heard only too well, but particularly on the island states. And it's also the broader economy, you know, the acidification of the ocean, the loss of the coral, the loss of that tourism income, the loss of the coral as a health a system, a key system to the health of the oceans. So it is, I think, a very important correlate, and that's why we see the ice as being such a very good measure of why we should keep to 1.5. I'm appreciative, Relph, that we didn't give you that much time to say a little more, if you wanted to, about the ICJ and why you think that is going to make a very big difference.
Basically, we come to COP knowing that we're not going to get what we want out of COP, and that's been the way for 30 years. It's just really depressing. We go back disappointed. And so a few years ago, we decided to start another track, which is seeking this advisory opinion, some sort of legal opinion or advice on what countries have signed up to in Paris and what their obligations are, and if they're not meeting them, are there any legal remedies? And so this is one of the steps. I know that there's lots of litigation going around the world. But in terms of states, this is the first time that the world's highest court has considered climate change. And we hope that there will be a very highly ambitious statement from the court, an opinion that says there are very strong obligations, binding obligations. Countries can be penalized for not meeting them. And that's something which will help the process here. But it also, you know, our environments and the economies on which depend on the environments and ourselves in the Pacific, it's collapsing. And we are really at the end of our tether, and this is why we're looking for any possible option to stop these destructive actions that are happening.
And it's very important to make that whole systems connection, as Johan was saying, you know, that what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. And of course, obviously the Greenland, the Antarctica ice sheets too. Are there any other questions? Anybody else want to ask anything of this esteemed panel? If not, I'm going to take the liberty, because all of this has been about hope. And I do think there is a lot of hope, actually, in the legal world, because there are a lot of very interesting precedents being set already on rights of nature. There was a Montana, the young people, you know, the intergenerational rights, too, have been met. And I think we're going to see more and more of these landmarks. And so thank you for your courage in bringing that. And the leadership, and it sets precedent that will really, I think, the students here will be thinking, will be learning from in their books. I'm going to just close on and I appreciate all your patience, and we've had a really lovely extended time. Thank you, UNFCCC. I'd like to thank them for the space. I'd also like to thank Mission Blue, and of course all my colleagues at GlobalChoices and all the hard work that went into this. We know there are a lot of people online actually watching. So I just want to, this is Václav Havel said that hope in this deep and powerful sense is not the same as joy, that things are going well, or the willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously headed for early success, but rather an ability to work for something because it is good, and not just because it stands a chance of succeeding. And the more unpropitious a situation in which we demonstrate hope, the deeper that hope is. And couldn't think of anything more than the small island states in your situations. Hope is definitely not the same thing as optimism. It is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense, regardless of how it turns out. In short, I think that the deepest and most important form of hope, the only one that can keep us above water, literally and figuratively, and urge us to do good works, and the only true source of the breathtaking dimension of the human spirit and its efforts, is something that we get from elsewhere. In this hope, above all, which gives us the strength to live and continually to try new things, even that in conditions that seem as hopeless as ours, to do that here and now. And we have had a panel that have demonstrated this, and I think is the inspiration for why we will make this work. Thank you, and I'd like to thank our panel.